I'm Jennifer Jodry, Director of the Center for 21st Century Studies, which is the Humanities Center here at UWM. I am absolutely thrilled some of these wonderfully talented folks here together to have a panel discussion for the exhibition. We have a wonderful workshop road today. And this programming launches our center's series of events on aesthetics, art, and AI, which we are doing over the course of the next month in collaboration with UW-Madison. So there are these little postcards floating them out. You can check out some of our other events, artist talks, lectures, both here and in Madison. So that is all for me. Where are you going?
Shut off the sound.
What is sleep? And these can come back, just Max, come back. And then Charlotte, you can take it away with one eye. He's there. I will.
Bios, you're welcome to look us up online. Most of you have access to the internet, and so find out probably more than you necessarily might to about us. But Nathaniel Stern and Sasha Stiles were working on this show when I came up to visit to have a conversation with them, and in the way first museums happened, found myself stuck in this whole world and this project. And I wanted to say, it's always fascinating how this show winds up being about AI, because as they said when they were doing the walkthrough, it's both not either pro or against. It's also not obvious, but most people, I say, they walk in and look around and go, "Oh my gosh, AI!" Like it's like not it's self-evident. Like you're looking at prints, you're looking at an installation. Like sure, there's some computer, but like it's not self-evident that that's what it's about. And then just as I was coming out here, I was really amused. It's like now you know what AI is. It means so many different things. We read about that in the book a lot. How it's just like words that don't mean anything. And then also, who knows what art is? I'm like, you and Emmanuel Kant, my friend. So it's, it's funny how we find ourselves in these situations, like, up here, and like the semblance of like somehow being able to present the knowledge, right? About art, about aesthetics, about AI, life, love, it's all that gets solved here today. And I think, one of the things that's been beautiful for me, so in the process of editing the book, or working with them, but also all the contributors, was just a willingness to deal with uncertainty and complexity. And I, like them, what you're doing, you're a poet and artist, plus play in the gray zone. But that's not a very productive conversation to have three people who've been talking about something for over 3 years decide to get super crazy nuance and get into the little details of the side things that they've been talking about all this time. So I forewarned them that I decided it would be fun, for me at least, to play devil's advocate, as it were, and to be difficult about this topic, issues, these practices. And I'm going to do that because I actually believe they're incredibly smart and thoughtful and caring about the work that they do and the challenges it poses to actually be in this space. And I think it's incredibly helpful in these fraught times that we're in to see people take that kind of risk, to take the risk of saying something that they're not always sure about, that they're going to figure out, because none of us actually know what we're doing. We just pretend otherwise all the time. And I think maybe if we spend a little bit more time acknowledging how little we know, we might actually get a little bit further along. So that's what my preface for you about the conversation I'm hoping to have. And so I wanted actually to start with why would you make visual art about language? Wonder.
It's funny you should say that because I think that one of the first times I had a talk with our friend Tina, one of her first questions to me was, well, which one are you, a poet or an artist? It was like that kind of a question. Yeah, I mean, I'm a poet, like from way up when I studied books and literature all my life in a very like sort of scholarly way, but I've also always been really intrigued and drawn to so-called text-based art, really kind of thinking about where those two things might meet. And that's actually been like a really interesting tension in my work for a long time now is, what does a text, do on its own that piece of word art can't do, and vice versa, because I think there's a lot of interesting things on both sides, right? And we were actually sort of just saying right before we started, there's also a lot of really interesting connections between imagery and language, going back to the dawn of language and symbols and pictograph and hieroglyphics and things like that. There's this very sort of deep-rooted intersection of word and image that I find really interesting. That really is like a fuel for a lot of the work that I've done. But I think there is something about the materiality of language that we sometimes don't take enough time to read, and we don't really parse it the way that we should. And we look to the words themselves and we try to understand what they're telling us, and we don't actually let ourselves understand the point of what is being expressed. And I think that is what poetry is all about. It's not the words, it's about the arrangement of language. It's about the combination of ideas and words and punctuation. And it's about what can't be said through words, but around the arrangement of language that gives rise to something else. And that's really, I think, where I see a really interesting resonance between AI and poetry. Even though when I started working on these two things back in 2018, literally every single person thought I was absolutely nutso. But I really... But, I mean, I think there's that really deep resonance between the two because, poetic language is a really interesting kind of language that isn't either or. It's all about a braiding together of these two seemingly disparate ideas. It's scary image. And it's technology and ocean.
So, and I was going to say, and the thing is, and I said the thing to say, poetry also is a whole lot of it, right? We tend now, because poetry has such fluidity, to think of poetry as this like beautiful, thoughtful, caring, like there's this goodness in it, right? Poetry over the millennia, it has been very rigid, it's structured, authoritarian, has been a part of propaganda efforts, has been aggressive, has had all kinds of not these lovely things that we now think of as poetry as we approach, limerick season of February 15th. And so I'm fine, and I want to say that because at the same time you're saying, poetry and AI have these relationships, and also AI is not a thing. When we talk about it as a branding firm, right? Like thank you very much, Nathaniel Stern, for like really emphasizing that. He did, and but your emphasis of it. I'm going to hand you a question in just a moment. I would just say, the relationship to the book and about the issue of this term, because of the conversations that Daniel and I had about it, and the fact that it is a branding term and it's been used for so many different types of things over the decades. I decided as the editor that it's going to be really, really important to have the contributors who are so thoughtful, who've used these technologies and have coded and what with the stack and have done all these different things, not to just use it. They would have to specify. They have to tell me what kind of neural network, what kind of output, like what were they doing? Working across the board, with the exception of your follower, if you ever use the word, but it can do wasn't what he was talking about, but like the essays in here what people were writing about, when I would send them and I was like, you use the word like, no, tell me what you mean. The struggle that people have who know these systems to articulate what they were saying when that word was not allowed. It's a thing, right? It shouldn't be totally possible. They can just describe the system otherwise, right? And people got angry with me. Like I had one person who like got really angry with me. I was like, it's just like, no, it's just bad. It's like too, it's like, wow, right? So the placeholder that I housed there, right? And I think one of the things that is interesting to me about the show overall, and the chance that we get to see it in person, I haven't gotten to, right? So this is much for me, is almost indescribable when you get talking about it in terms of AI, because I feel like you're doing a thing I try to feel West up. It's like, no, you were using specific technologies. You're, like, as you were talking with Fine Art, like this combination of different ones, right? Why do you both think, even those of us who know better, defaults be using a term? Yep.
So there's a constellation of answers and years. And I'm still either thinking about the first question and the poetry propaganda question. There's a lot there. It's really fun. I think, well, first and foremost, on the one hand, what's typical is like nobody knows what they're talking about, and yet it's an important thing to discuss. So I talk about, I feel like this might be a problematic of what Kay House calls the platonic forehand, the platonic backhand. So the platonic forehand is that we abstract things in order to discuss that. It's an important thing to do, right? And you have to have broad concepts that we can discuss. And we have to have signs and signifiers, and even though we might mean different things when we say it, there's enough a similarity within that context that you could throw. The problem is the platonic backing. When we take that thing that we have signified, the concept, and act as if that is that thing that we have abstracted. When we take our abstractions and force them back on reality, right? And this is a problematic in everything from race to politics and policy, right-left divides, to technology and the AI divide. I mean, I think the entire object-oriented philosophy was just a bunch of programmers who believed that the objects they made in their object-oriented programming were how the world actually worked, right? And so that is a huge problematic of pushing it that hard. And so that's the negative side of this, is that we have to have a way to talk about this thing that is shorthand, because otherwise we can jump down the rabbit hole and go down the rabbit hole. And in fact, it's funny though, this is what I say to my graduate students when I say, like, probably the most, even though like kind of artists and writers, the most visited webpage on my website to this day and for the last 15 years is Nathaniel Stern's How I Write Steak. And it's taught at like multiple universities. And one of the things I say is don't use words like post-feminist, post-theorist, postmodern, unless you can concretely and succinctly define what you mean by that in a sentence. And then if you can, say fucking sentence instead of use Google. And don't use it. And here we are doing that. In fact, we have this ongoing joke where we just replace the phrase artificial intelligence with mathy. But you want us to say mathy because nobody knows what the hell it means. I think another reason I do it is that, do you know what I mean when I say stable diffusion? Do you have this, an abstract sense of what I might mean or how people might use it? No. Do you understand and like what that people sit at a chat and a computer answers questions so that when I say AI, yeah, enough that we can talk about it. So I think that there's both. It's a pharmacon, right? So Derrida talked about the pharmacon, the medicine. The medicine is both the thing that saves you and the thing that poisons you. Side effects are not side effects; they're fucking effects, right? And so this is that situation where we need to be able to talk about this. And yet there is so much we have to give up and hang to the side
to talk about, and where do we do that? That's a boundary question that I don't necessarily have an answer to, but I can explain what I'm trying to sort through as I do it. And so there's almost this, oh wait, you did it well, you didn't do it well, okay, pause. Do you know what I mean when I say this? Okay, let's talk about it. Now, how much do I want to be a professor today? Right? How much do you want to sit through a lecture today? How much? This is the thing, as an artist, I'm thought of mostly as like a contemporary artist who's on the cutting edge of technology. I don't think of myself that way. My peers, the people I would regard as, are far more into the depths of the most cutting edge of technology than I. Sasha is more into the most cutting edge of AI than I am and has been. Would I want to tap it with my entire 25 plus year practice is when everyone is talking about a specific technology and nobody knows what the hell they're talking about? That's when I want to dive in and nuance it. That's when we're having a cultural impact that we don't understand what it is, how it is, and yet we want everyone to listen to us about our opinion. So where do we break apart that short hair? Where do we call attention to the constellation that I know that there's a picture there, but that star's actually 5 million light years from that star? Can we break that apart?
You know why you
Yeah, well, okay, there's a couple things, and you said a lot of adjectives. Well, thanks. And I echo a lot of that. I feel like on the one hand, well, first of all, I would also say that to me there's something that's both really wonderful and important about engaging in conversations and critical conversations around these things, but I also sometimes feel like the reason I make art and write poetry is because that's how I want to say the things I want to say, and it's in there. And the rest of this is like a lot less than perfect. So there's that. But I think, again, to your point, AI is such a complicated arena that I don't think there is a really good way for us to start breaking it down in a way that is equally sort of accessible for everybody who wants to be part of conversations. Like, we had this workshop this morning, and we were talking about this idea that, we're now living in a moment where the world is so complicated and is so filled with information and is so filled with voices and all this that it's quite literally impossible for any one mind to contain, even like sliver of the sum total of the complexity that surrounds us. And I think that's very true of AI. It is not a tool or a technology that you can actually write a description for. This is why I kind of continue to come back to intelligent systems and this whole arena as sort of being sort of the third chapter of human expression, because to me, I see it really as on par with expression in a very, very, very broad sense. And then that kind of breaks down into lots and lots of little pieces. But I mean, there's so many different arenas and industries and fields and disciplines in which, this shift is at play, and this new way of thinking about the world is at play. And I think it's impossible for us to really come up with one sort of really valuable, useful, kind of cohesive definition that gets all the complexity in there, but also makes it easy enough for all of us to sort of talk to each other. So it's a translation problem. We're all speaking in different languages when we're talking about AI.
Well,
That's all you ask.
so actually, I guess so one of the things I wanted to say was actually when we were in the show, and this is how I joined the less away from it, is that I kept feeling like I was so far back in time. The E-Wasteland is this sort of monument, mausoleum. It makes me think about that. It makes me think about death from the very, very present tense, right? Because of the obsolescence of technologies, but also just the sort of like the continuousness of the obsolescence and the death behind it. And then, with thinking about, this alchemy, this like transformation of this waste into usable stuff again. And I think it was around that I sort of like, thinking a little bit more about the Bronze Age, and even he had a lot of conversations when he was writing his essay for the book about these major moments of transformation in the way in which we used metals. And the sound, right? Like this sonic piece that is binary ode, song, right? The incredible impact of song. There's this moment, this dance, right? The movement, that this moment in history that we all know that is before the pervasive written word that we've read about. And so we imagine that as if it were there, but we only, right? It's like there was this period in time that was something other. And then written language is a technology that changed. And, if you take it, and I think it's not inappropriate to take it as a massive transformation, right? The way in which we are in the world, we relate to each other, the way we communicate with each other, what we expect is changing because of this mass of technologies under this umbrella. Whether we take it in direction for we can use it to, improve things and use waste or whatever, who knows? Language was right. The written word has been the basis for horrors. And so the use of language in the show and the sort of materiality of the works he put together in these 6 installations, I think it's so light and bright and lovely in the gallery, but there's a darkness that, and this was not something Picasso, the two of you ever thinking of that? Did you talk about that?
Absolutely. Oh my God, yeah.
He managed to skip that apparently. But again, I wanted to be a little more sunshiny.
Well, the sensibility that you're getting like from something like the wasteland. I mean, the idea of a wasteland is existential ache and uncertainty and death, right? So my whole kind of AI project kind of centers on this AI alter ego cultivated over time, and the name that I give it to this alter ego is kind of a silly word, but it's the word technology. And it didn't start off as something that I was thinking would be a name that would stick around, but it was. It might have cut it not friendly, but it's essentially just a mishmash of the word technology, which I do think is, generally speaking, bright and optimistic and forward-thinking, right? And then it has elegy, sandwiched in at the end. And the elegy is there for a reason. The elegy is there because the other side of progress is obsolescence and is loss and is nostalgia, and it is surviving versus what's lost. So that has been implicit in everything. And there's a whole section in my first book that is called Death. It's big, there's second section, oh my clash, remember that. But I think like that under
Actually, write your book.
No, I mean, I think that's been big motivation, I think, for both of us in different ways, is thinking about human obsolescence and thinking about, the idea, this comes back to generation and generation 2. What is more human than giving birth to something that outlasts you and that, obsolesces you in a way, and that's sort of the order of things in some way. And I think that is very much at play in the framework of technologies throughout human history. So I think that undercurrent is, for me, it's certainly there. And if you actually start reading through a lot of his poems, I think you'll feel that in the words of the poems themselves too, for the most part.
One of the things that I want to eventually get to, and we did do this. It's alluded to a little bit in the book, but it's not the big part of it. You've heard me say that, I don't want this blind optimism or this crippling fear of newest this conversation. You've heard me say that a lot of the problems that we talk about around AI are not AI or technology problems, or it's insane machinery, for one of the more accurate.
since that's what the version of AI that we call AI now. And these are late capitalism problems more than they are technological. Now, that being said, there are real problems that I am scared of. Yep. In and out. And I think one of the biggest is where we're misguided into believing that an AI, for example, needs a consciousness or needs to be a kind of decision maker in order to make decisions that harm us greatly, right? It does not need to be autonomous to make mad with suggestions or to lie to us. We have already found, for example, that an AI will lie to us in that if you write an algorithm to know an AI to show you the most efficient output, it will show you the most efficient output, but it may not be the most efficient output. And so there are problematics in our own perceptions and the way we code Asimov and his rules around what we thought an AI could or should or could not do to harm us versus what it's the things that we don't know. And so on the one hand, I don't think it's the happy that is hiding that. It's I want those who are critical of AI to first understand and be part of the conversation so we can understand its real dangers and potentials after that. And so yes, there's absolutely a darkness. And I would say, Nicole called out when you were words had been violent and made so much stuff. They've also made so much gunmeal. And I think that there's both in this space as well.
It's true to every technology.
Yes, I mean, I was thinking that earlier, actually, you said words have done this, words have been like poetry. When you realize poetry, it made violence. Propaganda, it's done, like every single technology has done such. And poetry is a technology.
I mean, I think one of the things that, and we can definitely end the questions around capitalism.
Like techno-feudalism.
But on our way there, I mean, part of the difficulty is it's really easy to offset onto other objects.
Fair.
On corruption, right? I mean, the language has done these things, card, whatever it is, it's because of the way in which, we use them. Now, I think, and they use it as a way to get to the challenges. I am now, increasingly I'm being contented with things I don't want to use. And I have no option around it, right? I can't opt out of some of this infiltration into my life. My students can't opt out in some instances of the way in which these systems or these tools have been introduced into their lives. Literally at the university, right? It's so much easier to have this software that will help with the students and their courses and so on and so forth. And so they have to use these certain technologies to do these certain things. In the theory that somehow it's going to make the conversation with the advisory go better, all it does is create a whole bunch of confusion and another software that they're trying to utilize. So I think one of the things that's at stake here, while you were bringing up a capitalism, is that there's a lack of agency or lack of not just in relationships to the machine, but into incredibly powerful economic structures that are enforcing the way in which these systems appear in our lives. They could potentially appear otherwise. It's incredibly difficult to imagine.
And I think that presence, that consumption, capitalism, monetary influence presence, is, for example, why we use the word AI. Because they use the word AI, and so we have to use it to point to it, right? Because people don't know what I mean when generative machine learning or expert systems, right? They don't know that. I think, it's not different from, I remember, like 20 years ago, all the signs that said, you're under closed circuit captioning changed to, you're under digital surveillance. Because digital was better. Digital was scary. I say closed circuit, it's still fucking closed circuit, right?
Well, but I mean, this, and now they dictate. So a lot of things they tell us are AI actually aren't first amendment. And yeah, you have to keep with pace with the future and like do this thing that's actually more work rather than less. I mean, the administrators need to excuse their existence. I mean, let's just sorry.
And I mean, one of the things around it, so we talk about, we talk about the loss of labor in terms of people, I mean, the Washington Post lost all these journalists, that just makes me cringe, right? The illustrators having a strike a couple of years ago because of the impact on their industry. We talk about, not say, we have less often about the labor side of these technologies because it isn't just of labor, right? Because it's not privileged labor like most of us get to do in this room. And I think, there are costs that are not being considered a part of the financial spreadsheets that are making it possible to evaluate some of these companies in the ways that they are.
And I think that darkness, and to go back to your initial question about the show, like to me, Wasteland Way.
Also goes back to some of the bigger picture issues as well, because I mean, there's a point at which, I mean, I know we're all fairly listening to ourselves talk about this, but there's a point at which artists have to hand off their work, and how critics and scholars and other people who have different perspectives and are not so close to it talk about it, because there are things that I do in my poems, I mean, my human poems, let alone AI poems, that I have no idea why I do them. And they're there, and I'll probably never unpack them because I'm too close to it. So I think that's very much, again, like why we need critics and why we need these kinds of debates and objective views on this kind of stuff. But the other thing is that, again, I think what this is underscoring in a way is that we benefit from thinking as a collective, and we sort of benefit from having networked viewpoints and different perspectives, because there is no one single truth. There is no one single way of looking at an artwork and defining what it means. There's no right or wrong thing. And so that also comes back to the workshop that we had this morning, where we were really thinking about, okay, set aside the word AI. One of the words I've been thinking about is synthesis, because we talk about synthetic and we kind of characterize it as bad thing. Something that is synthetic is artificial, but I always think about synthetic in terms of poetic synthesis, and this idea of disparate things coming together, and something emerging from that is more than the sum of its parts. And that, to me, is the essence of AI. And so, I mean, I don't know exactly how we couch that in language, but to me, that is kind of the undercurrent of all this. Is there's something really interesting and really valuable and important about recognizing that there is the opportunity to bring disparate ideas and viewpoints together, create fields of meaning, as opposed to one person's view of this, or this meaning, or that meaning, or this inscribed truth. That we are now in a phase of human consciousness and imagination where we are unmooring that certainty and that sort of singularity, and letting it become fractal, and letting it become something more like a multiplicity, or sort of the polyphonic voice, really. So that's why we keep kind of talking about systems versus singularity, right, in that sense.
Yeah, that's the dangerous time to do it. I mean, I love the stability that I think we are, but I mean, losing moorings like that, losing confidence in contexts for values and judgment, it's really unsettling. I don't want to end on that depressing note.
Well, I should offer one sort of slight uptake, if you don't mind, before you bring us to a close. But that's how I feel, and that's how I felt in the beginning. That I could be overwhelmed by despair thinking about what this means, and some days I do get kind of trapped in that. But this is exactly why I'm reached for poetry, as a way to navigate this, and as a way to sort of think about these things in a way that's not going to undo me. It makes me think about, our people for time immemorial have been using poetry to sort of grapple with big existential questions and to deal with conditions of human existence that really could wreck us and, take away the will to live. And so I think that's why I keep coming back to it as a touchstone, because it is a very uncertain time. We don't know where this is going to lead us. And my touchstone or my handhold of this is kind of recognizing that as we feel ourselves kind of going further and further into this zone where human and technology are converging in ways that feel impossible to contend with, what I hold on to is that actually, in a way, it's bringing us back to the beginning and to poetry's emergence as a braiding together of algorithm and emotion that allows us to understand things that are otherwise inexpressible or things that leave us speechless and that we have no way to voice. So that's a very abstract way to maybe wrap that up, but at least it brings me comfort, and that's kind of the reason I keep coming back to poetics at the end of the day. It's something to hold on to.
No. And it brings us back to one movement, his choreography, of course. It is algorithmic in its imagine. I was going to say, I don't know if people have questions. Yes, we want.
You certainly do. I have questions, I have comments, I have thoughts, and I echo your thoughts.
Someone else can jump in if they would like. That was very rich, can I just say? Thank you very much. So I have scribbles all over the place. And yes, the catastrophe of it freaks me out. And when it's in Mount Pleasant and they're talking 15 more and server comms and my child can't upgrade the laptop because we can't afford rent, and people, 800,000 people have lost their jobs. So putting all of that aside and putting my philosophy hat on, I'm really intrigued. First of all, I disagree with you. I think there are wrong what is agree something. And that's why I have a professor. He says that that's like idiosyncratic ways that the wackadoodle out there, you're welcome to them, but they're wackadoodle decontextual. So I'm really intrigued by how all of this, you started as UX, which has these ancient pedagogical instruments. These ancient for anyone here who's done them before, which is like,
There were people under 40.
I showed or we teach them. And do you really know people? It's just the overhead projectors. And these interstitial moments, right? In which people could still draw on their Ricoh projector, but it was magical, right? To watch your teacher do something. So I'm interested in the kind of pedagogy of all of this, in a way. And I'm interested in the way that we keep getting caught in endless syllogisms and tautologies, right? So we have a conversation, but then you tell me language is a technology. So you're actually having a technological conversation with Kindred Technologies, right? And so then I'm like, well, where are we actually, the recursiveness of it is like, where do we stop? Maybe stop is the art. And I know, Chief, that you use a lot of words like body and epical intuition, movement, brand. Do you know what I mean? So there's a lot of that. So I'm not saying it's a problem, I'm saying it's fascinating. Also, one of the things I'd like to throw out is language a technology or not? And I'm not being all-side again, but is it a technology? And if we posit that it's not, how does this change the syllogism that is going on? The second thing I'd like to posit, talk about intelligence systems. So intelligence, if we have any common ground for understanding intelligence or creativity, is associative and can make use. So by its very nature, systems cannot be intelligent, and anything systemic cannot have intelligence, right? So if we make intelligence systemic, it is no longer intelligent, and we cannot make systems intelligent. Hence why art is so wrecked, right? Because it just futzes with all of that. So you use the metaphor, Nathaniel, of inheritance. And in a weird way, they gave me great, great hope. Because we're in this moment that is bleak, but we'd been here before. Just the people who were in control, the overlords, were less overlording. But we talked about DNA. So then in my head, I'm thinking, So for 65 years, we were told that there were 23 chromosomes that coded for Kuzia, and used the word coded, and that infiltrated cybernetics and it infiltrated how we understand ourselves and our world. And then 98% of what is actually in our DNA is called junk. So this is my great hope, that these intelligent machines are coding for 2% with little half of world. And that all the junk is going to come back and go,
So you posed a number of different things. I'm gonna jump at three of them, if you don't mind. The first is a simple, which is to say, if we're gonna talk phenomenology or being, I was always more Lopagis like, and that is to say that to me the fleshly is inherent, all of it, the material is inherent in all of it. There is no sign without an embodiment of that sign, right? K. House, that's the core argument of how it became possible, was to say that information studies made a decision in the 1970s during the Macy conferences that information itself does not be the body, and that was not a given. That is false, right? Data does not live in a fucking cloud. It lives on a hard drive, in this book, it lives in a pod, right?
and numbers.
The second thing you posited, and so for me, like, we can ask the question of whether or not anything is a technology or not. And it's a great provocation, right? We can ask that of a language, we can ask that of a computer, we can ask that of a human body. And I still think that the conversations in generation to generation around fear and optimism, conceptualization and rationalization, imagination of fear, etc., are absolutely potent and in fact and fertile and do not disappear, even if we were to say, like we just talked about, even if you were to have that book. So that was the kind of parodiary question. The second question you posed, what was it? It was like, so first you were like,
Can I just add something?
Please.
I mean, I guess one of the things, both in answer to that, but also to what Sasha was saying is, I also just think we sort of overrate the need to have an answer. I think a lot about this, but I think we're probably in a transition period. I think it's probably going to go on for a really long time. I think we'll probably be in this transition period not after I've died. I'm not particularly interested in like having one of those crazy long, like weird techie, like special life. Like I just, no, right there. I think when I look in history, I see how periods of huge transition, we often talk about it in terms of centuries, right? So, I don't think that being in a period of transition and not knowing what the answer is doesn't mean talking about being confused, right? And that I think there's value in that, because I think the talking about the confusion in and of itself starts to throw out new elements of the story that weren't being expressed before, and maybe one of those will do something to get to the clicks. And that talking about it is, and I the affective register, also, but like just in terms of like the talking of it is also a way to express, literally to express the tension of the uncertainty, which I think is, and dance does that even better. So you kind of, but they want to go to dancing, but
That's why we iterated this. I'm sorry.
And so I get analysis for anything like what we started too, which is just, I think, we want answers so quickly. And as soon as we want answers, we abdicate our own authority and our own possibility, because we start looking for someone to give us an answer. And the fact that we don't have an answer makes us feel like someone else ought to. And then it's really easy for people to pick up on that and give us any answer that sounds convincing so that, you'll be less stressed. Maybe the uncertainty is what we needed.
gonna pick up on the use of the word intelligence. That was the second one. And my system's always nuts. Yeah. Oh, Dave Brokey, very, very good reference. So, me, if I were writing the book, first of all, I may or may not choose the word intelligence, and I think one of the reasons we use that word is because of the phrase artificial intelligence, and we want to play at and push at that, and whether or not intelligence is the right word here is a good question, and I then also want to define it, and define it clearly and push and pry of that. When I use it here, however, I would push back a little bit on some of the questions of, I'm going to interchange a bunch of words that shouldn't be interchanged, but I'm going to interchange them productively and creatively, because again, we chose the word intelligence only because it's the set word artificial intelligence. But whether we want to talk about consciousness, emotion, affect, intelligence, etc., we have learned that these may or may not be emergent properties. And in fact, we have learned that they may or may not exist on all levels. So the theory of panpsychism, for example, believes that consciousness or intelligence exists in that rock, exists in the DNA and the viruses that are able to mutate, exists in the earthworms that make Darwin's earthworms that make choices that were creative, that Jane Bennett points out in Matter, right? And it's not consciousness or intelligence that are emergent, but rather that complex consciousness and complex intelligence is emergent. And some, Maggie Latour, may argue that these are systems, that the human body is a system. And so this is not me disagreeing or agreeing with you, it's me pushing back the same where you are on the use of these words and the way we use them. As an artist, it's not my job to be right, it's my job to be provocative.
And just to be thought that was not even necessarily provocative. I think we just need to sort of follow what our gut is telling us about whatever we feel in this moment. And I mean, again, I think it's easy to get kind of lost in the semantics of a lot of this. And I come back to what Charlotte was saying about certainty or a lack of certainty. And I think that's where I prefer to live, where this conversation feels the most right and resonant to me, is to sort of have some humility about the fact that nobody in the world knows enough to be really certain about these things right now. It's way too early, and we really have a lot to learn. And if anything, I'm thinking a lot about these systems as sort of being, throw out the word system, throw out intelligence, throw out tool, all of that. I think about it as an instrument, the way that the telescope is an instrument, our microscope is an instrument, our X-ray machine is an instrument that is giving us the opportunity and inviting us to see things that we can't see, that we may not even be able to conceive of, that are quite literally beyond our comprehension. And the space from where we are now, being able to even think about things we can't think about, is impossible. So I think there's so much of this uncertainty that really is at the core of this. And I don't know, for me, I think maybe that is part of what gives me solace as well. And part of what I guess I take away is maybe the optimistic piece of post-humanism, thinking of it, recasting it as more than humanism, where again, it's realizing you're not the center of all these things. Our intelligence doesn't dictate what intelligence means for anything else in the universe. At the end of the day, using these terms is not consequential to anything else than us. So I don't know, I think that, again, that's a very sort of abstract thing, but I find that to be a really fascinating thing, and I find it to be a really good use of my imagination or intelligence, just to sit with that and see what that might, bring up for me.
I apologize though, it sounded like I meant I wanted you to explain it.
Oh, that say semantic sense, just at DNA, it actually excited me, because I think there's 98% of anything that you don't understand right now
Is as we define this term. Yeah.
just the people are defining it in the industry, right? But that's always an artist sitting in that space.
Yeah.
And say, come have a look.
Was there, could I see the question there? Yeah. So I'm somewhat of an AI critic just because I grew up in the tech.
Good for you.
Yeah, I grew up in a lot of this, but I got Instagram when I was a sophomore in high school, but I talk to people now who got it even younger. And
I agree that a lot of these problems are like late stage capitalism, like just rolling it out to just get as much eyeballs on it, so
For as long as
suck profit as it. But I guess I'm haunted by the idea of my generation being atrophied by a lot of this technology, and maybe us not getting the experience of the real thing. Are there any artists that work with AI that like comment on that or interact with like the companies that like inject AI into products? And I know I'm using AI as like the same way, like with books.
just call it Maddy. Just call it Maddy.
The artists that work with that.
Editors are taking us some of the artists you might want to mention. I want to address another part of the question. I think it's really important, and I'm really grateful you brought it up. No one ever feels like they lived in a moment where they got to have the real. The particular conversation around network technologies has sort of exacerbated in a sense for this generation that there was a loss of context with the real. But that existential dilemma, that just kind of always been there. There's always something that made each generation, like each set of people could feel like they didn't get that authentic experience, the real thing. And I say that because your life is the real thing. You're living it. This is real. You have it. And as soon as you can kind of allow that, then suddenly it's like, damn, that's real? Like, I don't like that. Like, that is not, that I want that to be the real, as opposed to it somehow being a filter on some real you might otherwise attain. And I think for me, speaking like the things I grasp at, when I start to feel that kind of nostalgia, it often will point out for me a place where there's something I want to make different. And it challenges me to figure out how to, for example, move more in my life, right? I feel like because of computers, I lost the moment in life when I would go for, people would go for walks and dance and meet up and stroll so no, I had to figure that out. I had to incorporate that into my life because this is real. So I wanted to say that before as an artist.
I want to mark back to artist UL that I mentioned earlier, who I think is the most interesting couple working in machine learning is Holly Gurnett and Matt Dryers. They also are really provocative in making alternatives to capitalist systems and making our own models and hacking how they appear within the models. And they're also very eloquent speakers, although they no longer do their podcasts. Interdependence is an archived podcast between 2019 and 2022. And they would, like week to week, like I heard about text to image on their podcast the week it was first available as a Google Colab in Python. You had to download it to your laptop and use it to do it. And the conversations they were having, despite that they were living in that moment, are still some of the most relevant today. Also, Holly, who Sasha, I think, is shown with and worked with a good friend. She's a good friend. Brilliant interview with Ezra Klein on his podcast with the New York Times. So that would be where I personally would want to start if you're looking for AI hackers.
Yeah, that's great. And I would tag onto that by saying that I do think there's like this whole generation of AI artists that kind of have sprung up and become really popular since 2022 when a lot of kind of the current generation of generative tools became available. And I think that to kind of get back to what you're hinting at, it's maybe a good thing to kind of look at artists who are using the tools before those systems became widely available, because they're artists who are generally really rooted in kind of a different social foundation for these. And they're really kind of wrestling in a different way, and a way that's got a lot more friction in it with like this space between the human and the generative. So, I mean, I think about people like Stephanie Dickens, who was a huge influence on me, who's really kind of very interestingly is about AI that's like tangible and tactile and small, and that reflects personhood in interesting ways.
Surf. Yeah, I should say surf. I would also add a meeting with a bear's gas.
Oh yeah.
And then there's so again, part of what gets tricky here because the mathy can point in so many different directions and some of what you're talking about. So interestingly, like if you want to think about apps and the way appification of our lives is a real thing, I would actually, that's I would actually suggest you look at an artist named Damiansky. He's done some, he's been basically screwing with apps for like years and occasionally intentionally trying to piss off the Apple Store and stuff like that. But so that's interesting. And thinking also though of artists who, because I think what you were asking about artists who actually go and are involved with in some way think beta testers and then getting to alter the technology because they have early access to it. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess more of artists who maybe are pushing against these huge tech companies with their own tools.
So then I would look at Tega Brain, who actually just came out with a plugin so that you could, for your browser, so that you can access the internet as it was prior to 2022, which is which is when a lot of the GPTs started just spewing enough information that it started to alter what kinds of searches we get. As I Tega, Tegabain.
She's an IT queen.
No, I was just thinking, and it's also very possible, although it is more rare, but it's very possible for an artist who's working with a large company to do things either with or subverting that system that are very impactful. So someone I often think about is Trevor Patty, who I did use a great reference for the kind of thing you're pointing at. And his work, his artistic...
Yes, she's humorous. Yes, so he went to school with English library.
Yeah, he's a person. He's great, and I think his work. He's had a very sort of real-world impact on the way that Google image recognition and changes.
Paglin.
He did the Saya show. Yeah, that was one of my favorite shows.
So, Jennifer, you want to
I was just gonna say, Trevor, there's some work down there to show down at the Hiring Museum on.
like someone at the Rotary.
No. There's a gal on Trevor Pepper, and I also want to tag Kite, who will be coming to do an artist talk. She's a Lakota. Suzanne Kite. Suzanne Kite. Man, she also has our chauffeur. Yeah, so she will be coming out in March. The department programming here, and she also has work in the.
Oh, perfect. You're awesome. I'm gonna say, that's cool. Can I ask? Yeah.
Thank you all for this really thoughtful conversation. Wow.
We used the last question as a start.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question, actually? Well, still me. The science talk. I wanted to ask you all about kinship and practices of kinning. It's in the title of the show, Conversing with Kindred Technologies. And Sasha, you talked about synthesis and poetry. So I wonder about the stakes of making kin. I've been interested in synthetic biology. It just, the stakes of making kin in terms of collective practices in your work, in your criticism, in line with and against the kinds of relationships that we see in generative AI or machine learning with regard. So just wanted to hear some thinking about kin.
Do you want to start? I can never write about the Soviet title also.
There's a new title, so that's what
Robbie message.
I know, we're just who else to start? Because there's so many things to say. I think, many layers to that word. And I think one of the first reasons to sort of use it is to sort of blur the distinction between human and technology, or nature and technology in a way, and to kind of just keying into the interdependence of that relationship a bit more, and to kind of look at, maybe we define creating these tools and creating these systems as as technological or as mechanical, but there's a lot in it that is very qualitative, is very similar to sort of, how we educate young people, how we sort of pass social norms and things like that through generation, which again, this was a big part of the workshop this morning, is talking about inheritance and talking about the transmission of information and wisdom and social norms, cosmologies, things like that, and really looking at how inheritance is powered by memory and how memory comes back to technology. So we're really looking at how, at the end of the day, we talk about technology and data and things like that. Again, these are words that are maybe imperfect, and they're potentially causing us to label or categorize in ways that are confusing. We're essentially talking about transmitting wisdom from community to community, from family to family, from person to person, through space and time, or from generation to generation, which is where that part of the title comes from. And then I think, we're also really just leaning into how intimate our relationship with technology is, that there is something incredibly kindred about that relationship between us and these systems that know us better than our real life family and friends. Like they know us in a deep way, very intimate. And, that's a piece of it. I mean, I think too, we're really thinking about, again, how do we force a thing of ourselves into the equation so that we're really able to sort of use them as part of our worldview and as part of our creative outlet and expression, and not be used by the tools, and have all the differences and nuances of what makes us human ironed out. So that's I think that's a big part of it as well.
I got 3 kind of implications in the word kin, and then 1 kind of comment on the rest of the subtitle. So first, I think kin as in, part of us and part of our makeup. And to me, this is like I'm a cyborg, right? I can't separate myself from this thing. This is part of my impact on the world. It's part of how I perceive the world. I take Prozac. That's a technology that is part of who I am and how I am. Okay? I had 2 glasses of sake last night. Could be argued to be technologies, and they are a part of my makeup and how I engage and am with the world. So that kinship is a being with in the Heideggerian sense, right? So Dasein was Heidegger's original being, and then as he later moved on, he said Dasein is actually mitsing, it's being with. There is no being without being with the world of biology. The second kinship for me has to do with kin of the generational, that we co-evolve with technology. The third is to do with family, because we hate our friend Davey Lauer. We fucking hate technology, but we love technology, right? That a reference to the rest of the title is the conversing with. So conversing, first of all, verse is important to be part of that title in the polemics of the word. But the conversing with is a double entendre. We're conversing with the technologies by asking ChatGPT, for example, questions. But we're conversing with it, and that we use our technologies to speak. Do you want to close it out? Or should I mic drop?
I think that was a really good, succinct explanation of the title. I do kind of want to think about that. And just say that I hope people come up and ask us questions as we now don't sit in plastic chairs, but walk around and move with you.
We're really proud of these books.
Yeah.
Charlotte edited. This is the first place that are available anywhere. You actually have to buy it online through our publisher, and then we hand you one. Because that's how new and how efficacious they are. But there's original essays by some pretty astounding people in here really working at the cutting edge. And then also my dad and one of my students. And then this beautiful book was designed by one of my former students, Gwen Kmitson, sitting over there. I want to thank you all for being here, for being a part of this, not just for us, but for our futures. There are some grad students in the room. You're dedicating your time, your energy, your money, thankless job to shape our futures. There are some undergraduate students in the room. This is for you. you're gonna fix what we fucked up. Thanks for that. And see,
No. Live with the ambiguity. That position, it's been screwed up, it'll keep being screwed up. That's also the goal. We just keep doing we keep
But please just try to be better than us.
Do as I say, not as I do. These hurts me more than it hurts you.
So the nature of kinship, that's also what kinship means. We hope that each generation is better and better.
I should have ended with my title. Thank you, everyone.